This great niece is
and join the crowd if you were inclined. Thank you all for coming to the official book launch for J.R. Tappenden's Independent City, which won the 2016 Wells College Press Chapbook Contest. Yeah. I'm Dan Rosenberg, and I host the Visiting Writer Series, and tonight I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the contest, and then I'm going to ask Rich Kegler, the director of the Book Art Center, to come up and talk a little bit about the book itself, and then Jen is going to come up and read, and we'll have time for a brief Q&A at the end. So that's the trajectory for the evening. Last year, the chapbook contest that we organized here at Wells received over 160 submissions from around the country. We received manuscripts in all sorts of styles: experimental, traditional, narrative, lyric. It was difficult for our judges to make a final decision. After our initial readers reviewed all of the submissions, with each manuscript getting 2 reads, having 2 people to pass through, we ended up with a set of 5 finalists. Each of the 3 final judges ranked the finalists, and there was some disagreement about which manuscript came in 3rd or 4th or 5th. But that proved irrelevant because all of the judges came back with the same answer for 1st place. It was Independent City. And just so you know, it's rare. That doesn't happen. Usually we fight, and it's a good fight, but I was thrilled not to have it. We all agreed that Jen's manuscript wasn't the only one that we would have been happy to publish. This was an incredibly high-quality set of manuscripts that we'd gotten. And if we had to just pick one, and we did, it was a unanimous decision. We were captivated by the restrained musicality, the surprising imagery of Jen's work. When we were talking about the final decision, one judge noted how each of these poems unassumingly but authoritatively unfolds until it has conjured up the salient particulars of its subject. Another remarked on the writing's precision and depth, its quiet strength, power, and subtlety, and summed up Independent City as a really wonderful, powerful collection. So we wrote Jen with the good news, and then the hard work of actually turning a manuscript into a chapbook began. And to talk about that for a minute, I'm going to ask Rich Kegler to come on up and walk us through a little bit of how that happened. Okay. And he walked way over there. So that's good.
I need props.
We'll give you props.
So, thanks for the props. Actually, the book itself would probably work well with the props. So here's the finished book. You see a finished book, especially one that's not quite a 1/4 inch thick. It doesn't seem very like, okay, it's a book. Books just kind of happen. Well, if you've been involved in the Book Art Center, and Heather and Hannah, and Dan was around a little bit.
Hey now.
A lot of the proofing, but if you look at, we brought some of the proof sheets that are sitting on the table over there, so you can kind of see what some of the process was. And all the text for this book was set in hot metal over at Skaneateles, New York, at Michael Bixler's studio. And it's keyed with a monotype keyboard that spits out perforated tape. And that perforated tape is fed into another machine, which spits out the type. Now, so when you're typing on a computer, even a typewriter, you see what you're typing. You don't see it in this machine. So if a typo happens, you have to catch it in the proofing stage and fix it. So let's just say in the end, it's a fair amount of work. But I think very happy with how this came out. The paper, the typefaces, and even, like, take a look, there's this is our 3rd in the series of chapbooks for Wells College Press. The first one that's the whole cycle ran since both Dan and I have been here. But there's actually an illustration commissioned by a Canadian wood engraver named Wesley Bates. And the detail is pretty tremendous, but what's even more impressive maybe is actually looking at the block to see how, like, the work that went in by hand to make this. And he was very sensitive to actually taken the time to read the poems. And so, while not overtly literal, in some cases maybe a little bit, but I think he did a pretty great job. So, rather than talk about every step, I would just invite anyone who hasn't been to the Book Art Center to stop by almost any time. But more importantly, to take a class, and you'll hear more from a class that Dan's offering next semester and a class that Heather's offering, where you have a chance to actually work on your own books. So we have a unique facility here that allows this to happen. So I encourage you all to stop by if you haven't been there. And more importantly, I want to turn it over and let Jen read from her book.
I'm not Jen. I'm going to just introduce Jen Tappenden for a hot second here. And before I do, I just wanted to thank everyone who had a hand in making this book happen. Rich and Heather and Hannah and the Bixlers in particular, who did all of the manual labor and a lot of the creative and intellectual labor to make this happen. Our intern from last year, Brittany Eckhart, who helped us select Jen's manuscript out of the pile. Did I say the Bixlers? I did. Good. I'll say it again, because it's an incredible facility, and it's wonderful that we have access to go up there and work with them, and to be able to say, oh, we want this paper. Yes, the name for it has an umlaut in it. That's fine. We'll just cast type in this hot metal to make an umlaut. It's fine. So it's really the amount of detail and the amount of sort of obsessive attention that goes into a project like this can't be overstated, and I think it's reflected in the book itself. So, of course, the most important person to thank about the creation of this book is the author. So, Jen Tappenden is the founding editor of Architrave Press, which letterpress prints individual poems, like the broadsides we create here for the Visiting Writer Series, in the hope that the poems will move more freely through the world, maybe as an item for a postcard to a friend, as a bookmark, as raw material for a collage. So Jen already has a deep investment in the kinds of work that goes into a chapbook like this. It's a beautiful project, her Architrave Press, and you can check it out. You can Google it or her. Both will get you there. She earned an MFA in poetry from the University of Missouri at St. Louis, where she also served as the university's first Poet Laureate. She's poetry editor for December magazine, and organizer of both the St. Louis Small Press Expo and the Natural Bridge debut writer series. And after a wonderful visit with my poetry class yesterday, she is here to share some work from the chapbook and some new work. I'm very excited to hear it, so please join me in welcoming Jen Tappenden.
Thank you, Dan, and to Rich and everybody at the Book Art Center. That is a beautiful book. I'm kind of pinching myself that my words are in it. I'm going to go home and swoon. I'm going to start with mostly work from the chapbook. So for those of you who are readers, you will recognize them, everyone else. I'll do my best to tell you about St. Louis and how these poems grew there, which is St. Louis is where I live currently. This first one is called Learning to Float. When you live by a river that routinely floods, things happen. Learning to float. So much of the matter is in the margins, between the deep warehouses of lake and ocean, where ribbons of water rush softly sharp and nearly caught in their own carved paths, then pile up slow and wide, old yarns prone to knots and tides. Here is where strings of water weeds stretch and clutch, crash together with the current, coarse braided, strands sliding, pools closing and as the earth turns her head. Even in still places, skeins of algae drain the oxygen, dead zones amid the fecid. And here is where it happens. Muddy channels change course on the whim of a fish, and the fish float according to tribe, salt or fresh. The trees and vines have no such skill and suffer for it, salt creeping in to poison the live oak, fresh flooding back to suffocate what's left. Memory holds our mentors, the trees tall and strong, a venerable bending with wind and grace in their shaded age. The landscape, though, has changed and roots remain in place, their example rotting to peat. A smaller thought, nimble minnow in tangled water, loosens roots, retracts them, redacts their limbs to fins, transfigures the wind's swish to a trickling sigh, and floats us free, unentwined, until we are all swimming through the grasping, woven margins, the matter of our roots unlearned. This is another tree poem, very different tree. There's an artist, Libby Reuter, and her partner Josh Rowan. Libby is a sculptor, and Josh is a photographer, and their project is called Watershed Cairns, and they call attention to how water moves through the environment. One of their cairns is called Tree for the Forest, and it's a series of glass cylinders nested, and the photograph of this cairn was in Forest Park in St. Louis in the fall when the trees were all orange, and it's sitting on a stump with the colors of the trees coming through behind it. And it got me thinking about trees as a reservoir, not just for water, but for memory. And in St. Louis, there's a lot of trouble in St. Louis. So what the trees would remember, this is Tree for the Forest. Not water, but memories of water, nested concentric, one to another, accumulated. History is both the quick injury that broke a young limb and the seasons of water, no water, that shroud it. No one alive remembers the sapling, but its pattern persists. None think of Missouri as 3/5 an honorable state, yet it's recorded deep in our trees. The stoutest branch just out of reach still has something of a notch on top. Water, no water, rippling scars, uneven, where rope sheared the bark. The forest themed full of such singular marks. Don't be fooled by the light in the spring leaves. Their color will be red again soon, when water is not water. Another quirky thing about St. Louis is there are these mounds that were built by people. So the people that we think of now as Native Americans, these are ancient ancestors even to them. And they built these massive earthworks. And there's only one left on the St. Louis, the western side of the river. And it has a house on top. It was good news. It was recently reacquired by a tribe, and they're going to remove the house. So this is Mound City. Centuries of hands have hovered over this place, raised this clay, this limestone into houses, breweries, a brick city cut into the backs of ancient mounds, raised to make room for the living. The last sits shot straight through with plumbing for a tiny carnival hat of a house. These days, countless smaller mounds, the houseless bones of overgrown foundations dot abandoned blocks, one grass dome added to another until they're seamed back to prairie. Empty sidewalks heave and roll for want of a foot until they bloom presently with invitation. The line of a front walk can still be read in its echo, a gardener's coneflowers, the red earth of a brick path left melting back to clay. I like to walk around, and as you walk, your perspective changes. And this one is definitely in the woodcut. There are crows and a tree that is losing birds. This is Captain Nemo Wanders the Midwest. Something sends up a periscope. No, it's a lamppost surfacing from a crest in the road. The winter oak, limbs wriggling with pigeons, is heavy, then slim in a cloud of feathers. The birdman is back to feeding them. Sunflower seeds collect in the cracked street, attract crows. There is a sinkhole, its fixed stare blacker than any bird's hunger. Underneath is a tentacle, no, a cave, dry gullet, waiting to be wet. In class yesterday, we talked about definition by negation. Handily, I have one of those in my book. It's called Euonymus alatus, which is the Latin name for burning bush. This is not about Moses, father of Israel, or his descendants who follow what and who they will. This is not about a garden or the red things it may contain or the things that may slither in the leaves. No, this is only about the silent service of a hedge, barely present as a deep green frame. All summer, the shrubs stand where they were planted, harbor tiny birds. The fall reverses everything. The frame becomes the focus, a flash, and the screen becomes a scrim. But what captivates is the flicker of vermilion wings, disembodied, leaves moving in the wind, caught finally a few damp embers, a few false embers in the damp. More walking. This is an archaic word. My dad used it a lot. They're called the gloaming, which is that magical time when it's not quite dark, but it's not really light anymore, and no one has shut their windows, and I can be nosy because they haven't closed their blinds. I love to walk at that time of day. The gloaming. Window shades wide open yet, in the sliver of evening before sleep. Row houses stretch along the sidewalk in 2s and 3s, watching us return from the market or a late ball game in the park. A peek inside is easy now. Just look at variations on the theme of couches, lamps, a still life in oils against a deep blue wall, so similar to yours, it could be home. You could be long, but then the shades begin to say no. Blink closed against your gaze, a neighbor made strange by the dark. These start to get creepy. In St. Louis, in the city, there's a high school that I drive by 2 or 3 times a week. It's Roosevelt High School, and they have this problem. It's located on the site of a former graveyard that, when St. Louis was founded, was well outside the city limits, and there's all these victims of cholera, immigrants that were buried there. But when they went to build the school, they thought they moved the graveyard, but they left behind some gravestones, and they periodically surface in the football field. Yeah, creepy. And the name of the cemetery was Holy Ghost, but it was also loosely known as Old Pickers. Old Pickers Cemetery. So this is football at Roosevelt High. The heaving earth has coughed them up at last. A tripartite gasp of Father, Son, Old Pickers, Holy Ghost. Forgotten stones grown up through sediments, hard-pressed to say who passed. The stones themselves no longer know their names. Graves unhinged, unmoored beneath the playing feet of boys, cusping manhood. Old bubbles from the bottom of a boiling pot, they grow as they rise to cast new shadows, subtle as the first spring sheen of grass, then suddenly a running ankle, twisted. These are the backs of bricklayers, nameless laborers piling up like unfinished houses, brick walls looming roofless, dividing the air, waiting for the weight of another course to push them back into the earth. The graves are patient while the game skin holds the boys apart, heads high a moment, then breaks against a surface stone, players laid in neat rows to rest across the fathers. This one is not in the chapbook, but it could be. There are a lot of ghost signs. Have you ever seen, are there ghost signs around the world? Like signs that have weathered, but you can sort of make them out. St. Louis has so many of them, and they're all really cool, and they're like ghosts on top of ghosts. It's pretty cool. Ghost signs. Bumpy old downtown brick gets paint like sailors get tattoos. A faded arrow points the way toward 7th and Washington, toward Buettner's Home Furnishings, their long-shuttered studio, now a shoe store. Another building down the block shows the back of its shoulder and the faint lace of a sign for King Bee hats. Ghosts are like that. Notice one, and suddenly they're everywhere, seeping through younger signs, directing their former shoppers who slip among us on the street. A man, transparent in his fedora, glides into Spot Coffee. The wisp of a shop girl lingers along a display of spring dresses. The shade of a newsboy glares at a metal box, auto-dispensing the Post-Dispatch, and their intent collects, all of us swept up, then obscured by passengers stepping on bus 59. Elizabeth Bishop has a really wonderful poem called Invitation to Miss Marianne Moore. Who was a St. Louisan? And I have a poet girl crush on Bridget Picking Kelly, and she doesn't come out very often to read. And I wish she would. Invitation to Miss Bridget Picking Kelly after Elizabeth Bishop. Bring your stolen boy with his steaming white skin and black hair like feathers of a swan. Bring the swan too, if it will come. I have a garden old as yours and ringed in a fence of rusted iron arrows. Its gates are carved pillars of limestone, smoothed by rain but warm today in the budding sun. Your horse, with his giant marble hooves, will find good forage if he will come. In every bush there is the promise of birdsong, of burning that will not be contained, that will bud among the ashes of the understory. There is even a stair that leads to nothing, its steps a perfect set of granite ledges for sitting, for a picnic among the hyacinths and their acolytes, the bees. If you will come, my garden will be real as the waving flag of your hair as you ride in on the statue of your horse, the black swan in the bend of your arm, and the black-haired boy behind you, his arms around your waist. All of this is only true if you are here. Please come. More graffiti. This is called Graph Writer. I referenced the Anheuser family, which is one half of Anheuser-Busch. As a girl, I thought that the full name of the place that I now live was Anheuser-Busch, St. Louis, Missouri. And then I moved there and found out that it's true. Anyway, there's a big Anheuser-Busch sign in neon, and it's animated over Highway 40, like right through the center of town. It's a great sign. Anyway, Graph Writer. From the interstate, you can see it clearly. You and every other 60-mile-an-hour shooter through town. Your shrug, your, what the hell is rat fag, fired her up the side of the old shoe warehouse, held the can steady as she held herself against the ledge and sprayed. First, the huge green fill, then the black outline of each letter, until her tag bumped across the 4th-story brick. It hits you, like a stranger shouting your name at someone else, half known, transient, gone a mile already, and red under the light of the Anheuser family's own neon announcement. This is really gross, but I love it. So it's called Body Farm, and at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, they have a place where they study human decomposition, and that's how we have Seaside. Life is Cyclical. One of my very good friends describes this poem as Jane Jacobs meets Shiva the Destroyer. Body Farm. Even a dead man is alive in his decomposing. His body expands with its own gas, a strange dome rising in the meadow, home to swarms of blowflies crawling neighborly among pools of bruises. The next generation plumbs nostrils, ears, an unhealed cut, and eventually the anus before rope beetles arrive to poke holes, open a new route to the stomach. The exhaust of all that industry is a subtle deflation, fouling the air, but the blowflies stay. There's still plenty of heart to digest, plenty of lung beneath the sternum, even with the ensign flies and the clown bugs moving in. They're all too busy to mind how the ants strip muscles from every sinew, carry off a lobe of liver, then come back for the sinews too. The broad, curving hollow of a hip bone dries white in the sun, a new monument to progress that signals the place to empty. Exposed bones and teeth aren't quite enough to live on, so what's left gets abandoned to the centipedes. Still, this body's former border can be read in how the ground rises, how the grass thickens there and shines in the rain. This one's new. There's a lot of photography these days coming out of Detroit. It's loosely termed ruin porn, and I have a problem with it. In that it's gorgeous, but it also is very unsettling. Like there's a trespass involved there, and so I'm trying to work out my love-hate relationship with ruin porn with this poem called Fetish, which is dedicated to Detroit, and it's in 3 parts. The people are not explicit. I know them only by their fruit. Dressed stone, brick patterned, intricate. Lovely remains fallen aside like petticoats. My eye full of private stairs collapsed, warped floorboards. A glamorous wreck has turned my head again. The height of the fall proved in ruin. Teach me again that I do not own this body. I'm the one clicking, the one who insists on image. Blue chicory holds the walls deep finger-like. Root depth, release, receive, collapse. Teach me again. I do not own this body. 2. Former factory, former church, former train shed or hospital, form follows the function of absence, no erasure. I crave the safety of a sterile field. Surely the patient was numb when the granite steps were pried away, was still under while I shooed away the pigeons, remains unaware, rendered beauty. I want to pin to my wall a fractal of rust and lichen, growth patterns flat. Teach me again. I do not own this body. 3. Leaves and paint peels blown into the corner, an open window overexposed, a box of white light to say what? Salvation lies beyond a walk through ruin? I touch it without touching. Untouched, I ask again, teach me I do not own these bodies. Sheer curtain rotted and rising on the breeze, animated, handprints on the door jamb, lock drilled, something ruined, and not ruined, not beautiful, beautiful as a carved handrail arced above missing balusters, the sheen bucked by long gone hands. And I should give credit where credit is due. The repeated line about teach me I do not own these bodies, I stole from Roger Reeves, his poet Maggot Therapy. I recommend his book King Me wholeheartedly. This one's not in the book either, but if at certain times of year when the Farnham and Bailey train is in town and you take the bridge over the viaduct where all the train tracks are, because that's old river bottom, that's where all the trains run, you can see the circus train, and every window, as the curtains shut so tight, and I wanted to go in there. So I imagined that I did. Circus train. I snuck on board because I wanted to touch the sequins of the lion tamer's waistcoat. From my seat in the bleachers, they looked more like scales, his whiskers ropey as any catfish's. I was convinced his compartment would hold a huge tank of murky river in lieu of a cot. I never found it. Instead, I stumbled through car after car of steamer trunks and wooden crates, bales of hay, and one cardboard box labeled, open at the top, labeled Mr. Slither, tiny white mice playing in the bottom. My plan was to sniff out brackish water, but on that train, there was no teasing any single scent from all the species of sweat and pee. Still, I kept squeezing along the aisles between empty cages, It felt like progress. What stopped me, finally, was the elephant car, no bigger than the others, but cavernous without cargo, save a layer of fresh straw thick on the floor. This was my trespass. Without thinking, I made a running start, belly flopped, and slid through the straw, leaving a line that pointed straight to where I sat. Never mind the number of pick blocks behind me or the little white mouse in my pocket. What I'd undo if I could, my scent on the straw in place of the elephants. And these last few are post-chapbook. My dad died a couple of years ago, and so I've been writing poems addressed to my sister, working through grief, and they're all addressed to dear sister. Sometimes it's my actual sister, her name is Cara. Sometimes it's me, and sometimes it's a woman involved tangentially with whom I feel a connection. Anyway, and they're all regarding something. This first one is regarding the Adirondack trip. He had all through his life, he had wanted some of his ashes scattered from the top of Mount Marcy. So I wrote this while we were planning the trip. Regarding the Adirondack trip. Dear sister, I want to climb this mountain like all the other peaks we climbed as girls. Just you and I and Dad, counting our breaths and steps silently, as if our lives never branched into marriages and children, as if we three are all who matter. We remain entangled, distant, spooky action, though he is ash and fragments of through the looking glass that spring to mind at random. How to tell you this without selfishness? I love who we've become, who we include. We'll need them all most when we put him in the wind. Cara, can I ask, we all be silent vessels above the tree line? Open our mouths only to let the wind sound its own grief in the hollow of our throats. There is no language more suited to the man we're letting go. This is regarding your nursing assistants. Sorry, honey. Dear sister, I saw you without your knowing on one of his last mornings. I waited in the hall while you helped him get ready. A sponge bath at bedside to banish sleep, at least long enough for he and I to reminisce. At Geneseo, the perfect whispered landing of a sailplane timed to Claire de Lune. Thank you. I know your work sometimes merges faces, turns the hall into a conveyor. Dear sister, we are not related, and yet we share this tenderness. I could see you seeing my father. And this is the last. This is regarding your wish for do-overs. If you haven't guessed by now, we spent a lot of time together in Geneseo and Elmira watching planes. Dear sister, in those moments, if you'd known, would you have yielded more easily to gratitude? All that milling around in junk stores and flea markets, waiting for Dad to catch up. When was the last of those? Maybe you'd go back to the last air show in Elmira, be more patient as he lingered in that rickety Antonov. That lumbering bus of a plane did not glint, its cockpit deep in leftover lunch and a scattered poker deck. And yet, chatting with the pilot, he sussed it out. The Antonov's stall speed was so slow that in a strong headwind, it would fly backward. Later that day, together, we saw the trick performed, and never since have you dismissed an ugly aircraft. Be glad you didn't know. Better to let meaning slowly layer itself over the memory, bittersweet. Of course, it meant you only got to say one crude blanket thank you, but Jennifer, if you had known then, or could go back to any of those moments now, the loss, its magnitude, would break you. And this is something that I worked on a little bit here at Wells, and I'm not sure whether to call it a prologue. It's a poem about the climb of Mount Marcy, and the prologue takes place at Heart Lake, which is where Adirondack Lodge is, and we had a cabin there. It reads more like an incantation to Heart Lake, and it exists in many time points at once. So over an incantation for Heart Lake. Dear fish who nuzzled the salt from our skins, how did you know we needed to be shorn? Dear rain sweeping past, the sunset quiet and anxious. Dear bears we don't see, try not to speak of while we stuff our packs with lunch and gear. Dear Dad, I transferred your ashes to the fold of your old map. They're the color of your hair, and they ripple over the paper as if the wind has already found them. Dear Tomorrow Mountain, dear girlhood sleep on lean-to floors. Tonight I rest between you on a proper bed, indoors, breathing loon song from the open window. In my dream, I walk back and forth across the lake until I've atomized all its water. When I wake, dear family, you are around me, and around you are the unseen, unspoken bears, and around us all are the webs of spiders slung between the trees, made visible by mist, and waiting for us to break them. And I will close with the last poem from the book because it is hopeful. It's called Peregrine, and it steals the line from Eliot because, hey, if you're going to steal, you should steal from something good. Peregrine. The sharp angle of an elbow in feathers against bright, cold blue can only be a spirit unappeased and peregrine, widely ranged already, but keeping her wings fully fingered to know the particles of coal ash and wood smoke escaped from electric plants and hearthstones, to know the crystals of ice born around them, a dirty snow, all of it a dissipation to be ridden as it is, the sun a cold light, the moon dissolving in it, blue craters of day brushed by the feathers of her eyelashes, the idea of an eye dusting the moon, moats disturbed and resilted in a growing delta, a new country. Thank you, and I guess I'm taking questions. Don't leave me hanging.
I have an initial question because I was just wondering if you could tell us what your what working on a poem looks like for you. Like you said, you were working on some here at Wells, and like, what does that look like? What is working on a poem?
It depends. Well, at the very beginning, it's just a lot. I've learned not to try to lineate. That was a huge. For a long time, I would lineate as I wrote, and it turns out that's really a stopper. So I just free-write. I have an idea, I have a central image that is suggestive, it has some deep emotion that I want to understand, some quirky, weird thing that I want to understand, and so I just keep writing, and usually there's a lot of gook that happens before I get to the end of like a page, and at the end of that page is the thing. And then I get rid of all the gook, and I bring the thing to the top of the page, and I keep writing. And then when it feels like it has a beginning, a middle, and an end, that's when I go back and try to lineate it and make sure. I want the poem to look on the page in a way that represents the idea, if that makes sense. So, yeah.
When you say that, do you mean like concrete poetry, or do you just want it to look a certain format that you like?
Well, it depends on what the poem subject and language is. Not necessarily, I mean, it can be a concrete poem, but to me, line breaks are one of the key things that poems have going for themselves that's not prose. And I get really angry when I read poems that are basically prose with line breaks and someone's passing it off as a poem. The line breaks are completely arbitrary. There's no rhyme or reason for why they are where they are. So when I say how it appears on the page, it has to do with the line breaks and where, like this first one,
Yeah.
Learning to Float, like I wanted that to look like a marsh.
Yeah.
And so where the lines break create that feeling visually, but they also have to make sense for the poem. You have to, I try to create surprise. I want the line to function as a unit of sense within the sentence, sometimes working against the sentence. And that has to reflect the idea in some way, you know what I mean?
You had a little back and forth with Rich about the formatting of that first poem, right?
Yes, poor Rich. Oh, Heather. Yeah, he was worried that, because it is all over the page, that, he was trying to gauge how exact I wanted it to appear, but really, I was more concerned with it feeling like a stream that's braided than necessarily how each line relates spatially to the others. If that
Yeah.
makes sense.
It's just a fun negotiation that,
Yeah, well, and when you've got an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, you can go way out, but then you've got to translate it to something much smaller. That's.
Good job.
Yeah.
Okay, what seems to inspire you most? Do you have something that touches you more often, or is there an area that is more touch your subjectivity, but also your art? Or
I
how do you
think-
go about inspiration?
I think images, when you work as a poet, you have to become a very close observer of the world around you and also of language and how it shapes your own thought. So suddenly the world becomes a very different place when you have those extra feelers out. So, for instance, I love walking at twilight. It's really fun, it's beautiful, it's eerie. It only lasts for maybe 20 minutes, so it feels really special. And that feeling and the tension between, being polite and maybe being a little nosy is attractive. There's gotta be those tensions. Like with the graph writer poem, that tag is that rat fag tag is all over St. Louis in places where you actually start to think, how did that person get up there? And did they risk, and so that when you start to think about the specifics of it, then the poem is suggested. How does a space get claimed? How does it get marked? Who gets to mark it? What are the unofficial, these paths just present themselves once you're really observing.
It's more what you see and think rather than an emotion.
At first, yes. And that changed, the Dear Sister poems are a real departure for me because those start with feelings like wanting to go to the Adirondacks with just my sister, but that's obviously a non-starter. So I had to work through that feeling and find images for it. So those were sort of the reverse project, if you will.
Your poems are very visual, like I can see what you're trying to depict in some respect. Would you, or have you published your work along with photographs or visual art, or do you think that would detract from your words in some way? Or do you have an artist that you would like to?
I'm really jonesing over this woodcut, I'll tell you that. I think it was it you, Dan, that pointed out the skeleton
I just pointed out that I hadn't noticed the skeleton the first 3 times I looked at it.
I didn't notice the skeleton either,
Yeah.
and there's a skeleton woodcut. It's pretty great. So I think that kind of exchange, yeah, that's pretty awesome. The Watershed Cairns poem, those people were so thrilled that, like, I'm not the only poet who's writing about their work, and they're just really thrilled. So that kind of stuff. I don't know, I've had my work published in magazines that have a lot of art, and it's really interesting to see what they get paired with. I've never actually sought out an artist, though. Maybe I should.
And I just wanted to point out, it's so great when you read that tree poem that you're standing right in front of the tree.
By Charles Birchfield.
Yeah.
Pretty
The
amazing.
atmospheric, couple of.
Yes. Going once?
The Mountain City, there's, across from St. Louis, there's the remnant of an
Cahokia.
enormous city, it was over 1 million people.
Yes,
Several hundred years or 1,000 years ago or something.
yes.
Yeah.
It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site,
Yeah.
and there's an interstate right through it.
Yeah, good.
Because, you know, that's what we do. Yeah, it was a city, but that's like, and those were the people who are the distant ancestors of the current Native American tribes.
Yeah.
It's a pretty creepy, great place.
You never, it's never talked about, it's never fought or anything, you know?
No.
Maybe it is in St. Louis, but.
Well, it's the kind of, like, everybody, so unfortunately, there's a town in Cahokia, near Cahokia Mounds, and the town of Cahokia is kind of a dump. So unfortunately, I think the World Heritage Site, people like, why would you go to Cahokia?
Well, there was another one in, Louisiana or something.
Mhm. And when you sit back and you think about the industry, the coordination required to make something that size, and then, you know, there are pictorial maps of St. Louis. There was one done by Continent Dry before the Civil War. They went up in balloons and drew. So it's sort of it's like Google now, but drawn. And there are mounds that still existed at that time that were drawn in. They're really, really great. They're even like little guys on their horses, and, you know, people, there are sinkholes everywhere, and there are people in the sinkholes, which is just really funny. But yeah, they just got pulled apart because they had stone and clay and useful building materials, and people were creeped out by them because they were made by a culture that was pre-Christian. So for a little while it was, let's get rid of them because they're a pagan thing. All kinds of horrible things.
But if Trump gets elected, he'll bring that all back.
Yes.
Please
Maybe one more. Do we have one more?
Oh, yeah, okay, this is a slightly personal question, but, your poem about the airplanes, like, about an aircraft that were being judged as ugly, and that was beautiful. My dad's a pilot, so I've grown up around planes my entire life. How did you end up around planes? It's very odd for people that don't have pilot fathers or relatives or anything of that nature to be around planes as frequently as you said you were. And that's beautiful. What about the planes touched you to write about them in your memory?
My dad really loved World War II era aircraft. And Elmira, I don't think Elmira still has this show. It's called The Wings of Eagles.
Geneseo has it.
It's
I've been to that one.
Geneseo, they're two separate. So the dude who owns Geneseo, it got huge and moved to Elmira, and then there was a falling out,
Oh, wow.
and that show doesn't happen anymore. The one at the Elmira airport was so huge. I mean, they had people flying in. That the entire length of the runway was just, you know, and I'd follow my dad around, and I loved planes too. I think I inherited poetry from him. I also inherited a fascination with cool planes.
Two very good things.
Yeah, so I was just following him around because he did cool stuff.
Cool.
So I want to go. Yeah, flying and air for a long time was a core metaphor for me. I think we can, did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody going once? Going twice?
Thank you so much. Great. Independent City is available now for purchase tonight. It's $20, and in the future online it will be $30. So hurry for you lucky folks. Come up and check them out. We also have over there proofing sheets and all sorts of weird ephemera from the process of creating this book we can check out. The woodcut is up here. Jen would be happy to talk to you, sign your copy of the book.
I brought a pen.
She brought a pen. Please come around, but thank you all again so much for coming out, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.